Hello everyone, and welcome to Sips and Stories, and Happy New Year! In this video, I will be discussing my top 10 favorite classic books of 2023 and giving you some excellent classic recommendations for the new year. So grab your favorite beverage as I discuss my favorite books of 2023. At number 10 is How Green Was My Valley by Richard Llewellyn. And this book has been on my TBR for a very long time. It came highly recommended to me by one of my all-time favorite booktubers, Lesley Rickman. I love her channel and I just think that she has amazing taste, so I will link her channel below. And she has always talked highly of this book and I've always wanted to read it. It's just very difficult to find at bookstores and online, and very difficult for me personally to find in my library. So when I came across this used vintage edition at a thrift store, I bought it immediately and I immediately started reading it all the way back in January of 2023, and I loved it. It was the very first book that I finished last year, and it was such an amazing read. It's a wonderful coming-of-age story about a young boy named Hugh Morgan, and he lives in Wales with his very big extended family. It kind of is set at the early part of the 20th century, and it is set in this coal mining community in Wales. And so you see the experience of the coal miners, not only in the town itself, but in this particular family, in the Morgan family. Everyone in the family, from the father all the way down to the brothers and the sisters' husbands, everyone works in the coal mines, and they are determined, this family, that the young boy, the young protagonist, Hugh, is going to escape this life, is going to escape this harsh poverty life of working in the coal mines. And he's going to be the first Morgan to go to college and make a different life for himself. It's very similar to, I think if you like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Waltons or Little House on the Prairie, if you like kind of dramatic shows and family sagas like that, I think you will really enjoy How Green Was My Valley. In fact, a couple years ago, I did read Cider with Rosie. It's pretty similar, set in the similar time period about this young boy growing up in the UK at the time. I think that this book, How Green Was My Valley, is 10 times better than Cider with Rosie, so I just want to put that out there. This is just a fantastic coming-of-age story. I love the main character, Hugh, and his father is really interesting. Also has this great relationship with his sister-in-law, Braun, and just how it starts off when he's a little boy and then how he grows up and his relationship with Braun. Fantastic. It also is just about his first love and going to school, all that good stuff. Really, really great story. The characters are amazing. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, traumatic and dramatic situations involving the coal mines, a lot of accidents in the town, the formation of the Union. Just a really, really great book, and I can't recommend it highly enough. At number 9 is When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr, and I don't actually have the physical copy of this book because it was a library book, but I am so happy that I read it, and I do want to go back and read the other 2 books in the series. This book is a coming-of-age story, again, about a little girl growing up in Berlin and how her family had to escape Nazi Germany, and they become these refugees living all throughout Europe during World War II. It is loosely based again on the author's real life childhood of growing up with her family and escaping Nazi Germany. It starts off, obviously, she's a young child and she doesn't really understand why they have to leave Berlin, why she has to leave her family and her friends behind, her school friends, her neighbors. And because it's told from a child's perspective, it's really interesting. Hence the title. She genuinely thinks that Hitler has stolen all of their stuff, like their piano and all their toys and games, and she thinks he's playing with all their toys. So it comes from this very innocent perspective about this childhood experience as a refugee in Europe at the time. The father is a newspaper reporter, and they are a pretty well-off family in Germany at the time, but they're Jewish, and so he knows that he is going to be targeted by the Nazis, and so he's one of the first people people to get out of Germany before it hits the fan. And so he goes ahead to Switzerland to find a place for the family to live, and then the mother and the 2 children come after him. Just those scenes of the mother on the train just trying to get out of Germany, and just her tenseness and her frustration and her fear that they're not going to be able to escape Germany, and just how she's clutching their passports and clutching her bag. That scene was really tense, and it did feel very true to life. Also, there's a lot of scenes in Switzerland, and then my favorite scenes all take place in Paris when the children are going to school in Paris. There is, as you can imagine, a lot of anti-Semitism in this book, just that the family endures a lot of racism and all these different places that they live throughout Europe. Eventually, they relocate to England, and so the next few books in the series about Judith Kerr's childhood take place in England, so I cannot wait to read those. One of the reasons I love this book so much is because it is told from a child's perspective, and you really end up rooting for this family. As horrific as this time period was, it's also really cozy as well, if that makes sense. So I think if you like books like Betsy and Tacy or Ballet Shoes, or just kind of any of those old-fashioned children's stories like I do, you'll really enjoy this book. You really end up rooting for this family and coming to love these characters, the brother, the mother, the father. I especially loved the mother because she was so used to this just glamorous life in Germany, and just kind of watching her have to learn how to sew for the family and how to go shopping in France with a very limited budget. It's really interesting, and you just can't help rooting for this family. I love this book, and it was one of my favorite reads of 2023. At number 8 is The Essential Marcus Aurelius, and I won't lie, 2023 was a very difficult year for me. It was one of those years where I felt like I was being tested. As you can imagine, I was just kind of searching for some answers, reading a lot of self-help books, a lot of religious books, spiritual texts. And one of the philosophers that really helped me get through 2023 was Marcus Aurelius, and he's best known for Meditations. This book, The Essential Marcus Aurelius, is more of a condensed version of Meditations, so I will link it below. It's really good for novices like me that are new to this idea of Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius and his school of thought. And so it does include a history about Marcus Aurelius. He was one of Rome's last emperors during the Pax Romana, and he is just an amazing philosopher, amazing thinker. This whole idea of Stoicism is really about learning to master your emotions and use logic and reason to make decisions. I think that's why it really helped me get through 2023, because Marcus Aurelius is not saying that everything is sunshine and rainbows, that life is tough and that you're going to encounter a lot of difficult situations in life, a lot of difficult people in life, but that you cannot let that stop you from being the person that you need to be. He's very adamant about self-discipline and virtues and things of that nature. He's really into mastering yourself, and that you have an obligation, a moral obligation to yourself and to the world and to the people in your life to become the best version of yourself. He's very helpful in not letting yourself fall into that victim mentality that so many of us can fall into, that trap if something bad happens to us. Again, I love this book. A lot of great quote-worthy passages in it. He almost reminds me of like an old 2,000-year-old David Goggins. So I think if you are familiar with that book, You Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, you'll really like Marcus Aurelius. He's just coming from that same perspective. Don't fall into that victim mentality. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Be the best version of yourself that you can be. I think this is just a really nice book to read in the new year when you're kind of creating new goals for yourself in the year 2024. At number 7 is Kim by Rudyard Kipling. This is another coming-of-age story based on the author's childhood. And Rudyard Kipling is kind of a new-to-me author. I only read The Jungle Book a couple years ago for the first time. Again, it's really interesting, very amazing. I highly recommend the Minalima edition of The Jungle Book, and so I will link that video below. So Kim is more of an autobiographical account of Rudyard Kipling's childhood. He famously was born and raised in India, and then when he was a young boy, they shipped him back home to England to school, and he hated it. So I think that Kim is just kind of a catharsis for him. It is fiction. It is the story of a little boy who, again, is an orphan. His father is a British officer, or was a British officer, and his mother was an Indian woman. It starts off that he is just this orphan running around the city, getting involved with all these kooky, crazy characters. And then at one point, he teams up with this Tibetan Lama. And that is really the heart of the story, is just the Tibetan Lama and Kim's journey throughout India and just all these amazing adventures that they go on. Kim is also working with British intelligence at this time, and he's kind of helping out, sending all these secret messages and running all these errands and working for all these crazy kooky characters in India at the time. And at one point they do try to domesticate Kim and send him back to school with the other British officers' children. And he is just not having it, and he does everything in his power to leave school. And again, just this relationship that Kim has with the Tibetan monk, the Tibetan Lama, is fascinating. I especially love Rudyard Kipling's description of enlightenment at the end of the book, when the character of the monk reaches enlightenment, but then he comes back to help Kim. It's such a fascinating book, and just a really different perspective of a time and a part of history that has gone by, that has long gone by. It really is just this perfect blend of East meets West, and it will definitely make you want to travel to India and just visit that culture. This predates Indian independence with Gandhi, so there is a bit of racism in this book because of the time period and the British colonialism. But again, a fascinating book, and I highly recommend it. At number 6 is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. This book was probably the most surprising read for me in the year 2023. I had no intention of ever really reading this book, even though I have this beautiful Barnes & Noble edition, which is just so stunning with the foiling and the gilt edges there. But I really enjoyed this book. It really came as a huge surprise to me. The reason I even read it was I wanted to read Riordan's latest middle grade novel, Daughter of the Deep. And that book is about Captain Nemo's great granddaughter. And so in order to read that book, I knew I had to go back and read the source material. And Daughter of the Deep was okay. I won't lie, it wasn't my favorite Riordan, but 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was amazing. I am so happy that I read this book. And now I really love Jules Verne, and I want to go back and read all of his books, including Journey to the Center of the Earth and The Mysterious Island. I just think he is just one of those classic authors that is also very modern in his outlook and his perspective. One of the reasons that I love 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is I really loved the character of Captain Nemo. He is just such a fascinating character. I love that he is neither a good person nor a bad person, and you can kind of see him through multiple perspectives. And you don't really understand why he is the way he is, but there is kind of some indication that he has left mankind behind, that he has had some tragedy in his past, that his family has been killed, and he has just created this new life for himself on the Nautilus, and he refuses to go back into civilization. He's just kind of become this underwater explorer of the oceans and this adventurer. And he teams up with this professor and this sailor, and they go on this underwater exploration around the world in Captain Nemo's submarine, the Nautilus. And as you can imagine, there is just a lot of adventure stories about Atlantis and squids and giant sharks and things like that. But Captain Nemo himself is the best part of this book. Just his philosophy about human nature and mankind. I think the back of my book says it best. It says, "The earth does not need new continents, it needs new men." So again, if you do love the oceans too, I really love the idea that the oceans are just this last frontier that we have, just this unexplored world, a lot like outer space, and just these animals and just the abundance of nature in the oceans. Really great book. I loved it. I also went back and watched the Disney movie, which I had never seen before, starring James Mason and Kirk Douglas. That was also a really excellent movie, and it does stay pretty true to the book. I also liked that they really highlighted Ned Land, Kirk Douglas's character in the movie. And in the book, you know, Ned Land is sort of kind of this like buffoon character, but in the movie, he really is the only person that is questioning Captain Nemo and saying, look, this guy is holding us hostage. We need to escape. We need to get back to civilization. We can't get caught up in this guy's agenda. So I really like how the movie with Kirk Douglas kind of highlights that, and that Captain Nemo isn't necessarily a good person. I also love the technology in this book and just the way that Jules Verne describes the Nautilus and this power source of the Nautilus. And you're kind of wondering when you're reading it, did Captain Nemo discover cold fusion? Did he discover, you know, 0-point energy, or was he like pre-Tesla even? And so I think, yeah, if you are fascinated with all that, just like history and technology, I think you will really, really enjoy this book. All right, at number 5 is The Last Chronicle of Barset by Anthony Trollope. And this just represents the entire Barsetshire Chronicles, which I have been reading for the last 6 years. And Anthony Trollope has now become one of my favorite classic authors. If you are looking for something really good to read in the new year, a really good classic book or series to sink your teeth into, I highly recommend The Chronicles of Barsetshire. It starts with the Warden, Barchester Towers, which is probably the most famous book in the series, Dr. Thorne, Framley Parsonage, The Small House at Allington, and this one, The Last Chronicle of Barset. The reason I love it is because as cozy as these books are, as romantic and sweet as they are, there's also a really great sense of humor in it. There's a lot of political satire, just a lot of fantastic characters. My favorite characters were definitely Archdeacon Grantley, and he does not disappoint in this last installment. I loved Miss Dunstable. She was probably one of my favorite characters in all of classic literature. Lily Dale, just everyone in this series is fantastic. And I love his writing because, again, it's very cozy, it's very charming, but it's super smart as well. So it kind of satisfies the intellectual side of you as well. And I do recommend him for fans of Jane Austen. So I think if you love Jane Austen and you're just kind of looking for a similar author, I do recommend Anthony Trollope because he has that same keen observation of human nature that Jane Austen had, and his books are very romantic as well. Maybe not as romantic as Jane Austen, but really cozy, really charming reads. And moving forward into 2024, I might move on with the Palliser novels, and I will probably always be reading some Trollope because he is by far one of my favorite classic authors. And at number 4 is Oliver Twist by another Victorian author, Charles Dickens. And I love this book. I am so glad that I finally read it. I picked it up because I really wanted this Wordsworth edition. It's a little hard to see on camera, but it's absolutely stunning. It's just got a picture of Victorian London on the front, and then on the back it has Oliver's cap and it says, "Please, sir, I want some more." And I think we're all somewhat familiar with the story of Oliver Twist, but I had never gone back and read the source material until now. I knew it was about an orphan that ran around with this gang of thieves. I think at one point I was even in the play when I was a kid, but now that I've actually read the book, I think it is fascinating. I think it was excellent, and it was by far one of my favorite Dickens. And I've read other things by him, like Great Expectations and Tale of Two Cities. And I just think this is a different side of Dickens. I went back and looked it up, and Oliver Twist was one of his first books that he had published. And you can tell just the tone of this writing is a lot more energetic, a lot more impassioned. Charles Dickens was famous of spreading awareness about the poverty and the slums in London at the time when he was writing. He would go into the slums and talk to the thieves, talk to the prostitutes, and through his writing, he really spread awareness about the poverty at that time. And so I think that is really the point of Oliver Twist. It does make you want to be a better person, and I just love this idea of Oliver and protecting innocence and making sure that we do everything in our power as a society to help innocent children. So I really like the idea of this book. Unlike his other books, David Copperfield or Great Expectations. The character of Oliver Twist doesn't really age in this book. I think at the end he's maybe about 12 years old, 12 or 13. So I like that about this book. It does feel like a children's classic. And again, his writing is fascinating. His characters are fascinating. Fagin, Dodger, Sykes. My favorite character in the book is by far Nancy. I just love those scenes with Nancy where she's always trying to protect Oliver, and then at the end where she risks everything to warn Rose and Oliver about monks, and she risks the wrath of Sykes. And I really like that scene between Nancy and Rose, where Rose is telling Nancy, look, you don't have to go back there. You don't have to go back to Sykes. Stay with us. I'll give you some money. I'll help you escape this lifestyle. And Nancy is just kind of fatalistic. She says, there's nothing I can really do. I'm a product of my environment. I was born and raised into this environment. I'm a part of this culture, but I do want to help people like Oliver escape this. And that I thought was just wonderful, just the way that Dickens described Nancy. And you can see that in just the poverty and the homelessness crisis and the drug epidemic that is happening in the world today. So as I was reading this, and then when I went down to Seattle and saw this poverty and saw the homelessness in reality, I couldn't help thinking, wow, things should not have gotten worse in the last 200 years. They should have gotten better. I wonder what someone like Dickens would have thought of this, would have thought of the homelessness crisis, would have thought of the drug epidemic. And then you think about Nancy and what she's saying. Is there anything we can do to change this? It's really a mindset that we have to change. And this book will really make you think about, not only the past, but our own time period, our own culture. It'll really make you think, like, what can we do to help people? And that's why I like it. It'll make you want to be a better person. At number 3 is The Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. And I haven't really talked about Edith Wharton on this channel yet, but she is by far one of my favorite classic authors. In fact, Edith Wharton is probably known for her 3 New York novels, including The Age of Innocence, The House of Mirth, and this one, The Custom of the Country. But now that I've read this one at last, I would have to say that The Custom of the Country is by far my favorite Edith Wharton. And she's dealing with this time period in history, a lot like the show The Gilded Age, of this new money versus old money, of this new world in America and New York versus the old world in Europe. And she does explore a lot of these themes again in Custom of the Country. The reason I picked it up recently is because of this new Penguin Deluxe edition, which is just gorgeous. I love this book. It is so cute, so beautiful with the deckled edges and the French flaps. This edition also has a foreword by Sofia Coppola, and apparently Sofia Coppola is going to take this book and turn it into a movie. Now that I have read it, I really, really hope that she does. The story is about a young woman, a young debutante woman named Undine Sprague. And Undine is this very selfish young woman. She's a social climber. She comes from new money. Her father has just struck it rich, and he agrees with Undine to move the family to New York so that she can make a suitable match, a suitable marriage in New York society. It starts off when the family is all living not on Park Avenue or a place like that, but they are living in this hotel, and Undine is going to all these balls and parties, and she is really trying to ingratiate herself with New York society and social climb. That's what this book is about. It's basically just about Undine trying to claw her way up in society, first in New York, then in Europe. So there are a lot of scenes that take place in Paris. Edith Wharton famously lived in Paris for most of her life. And again, Undine is not a likable character. She's kind of like an anti-hero or anti-heroine. And this whole time you're like, oh, she's bad. She's not good. But the whole time you're reading the book, you're rooting for her because you realize, okay, she doesn't change. She kind of stays the same throughout the book. What you see is what you get with Undine. But it's just fascinating to watch all the people in her life, her parents, all these men that she meets, her husbands, her children. And you realize, like, Undine isn't the only one doing this in a vacuum. Everyone in her life is selfish. Everyone in her life has ulterior motives, and Undine is just using that to get ahead. And so that's why the whole time you're rooting for her, because even though she's an unlikable character, she's not really a good person, she is all about self-preservation, and you cannot fault her for that. I love her, really one of the most interesting characters I've come across in literature. I also just love the tone of this book. Edith Wharton can be very dramatic, very melodramatic. Her books can endure a lot of tragedies, a lot of love tragedies, but she comes at it from more of a humorous angle than she does in Age of Innocence or House of Mirth. So I would say that's why I like this book the most, because it does have more of a sense of humor than her other novels. And there are just so many quote-worthy passages in this, and just so many times that I laughed and chuckled and was reading passages to my family. If you just like a really smart, intelligent book, you will really, really like The Custom of the Country. And yeah, I love Undine's character, and you're rooting for her the whole time. If you want to read a book about a woman that doesn't always follow the rules, I think you will really enjoy The Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton. All right, we are nearing the end, and at number 2 is Return of the King by j.r.r. Tolkien. So woohoo! 2023 was the year that I finally finished the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and now I can pat myself on the back because I am finally a fan of Tolkien. I finally get it. I finally feel like I'm a part of this world now. Like I said in previous videos, the reason I did not read this series as a kid or as a teenager was because the movies came out when I was a teenager, and as good as those movies are, I didn't like the violence in them, so I thought the books were going to be very violent. But just the last few years, I was determined since I started this channel that I was going to finish this series once and for all. I know that this is such a beloved series, such a classic. Also, I'm a huge fan of C.S. Lewis, a huge fan of the Inklings and the Oxford group, and I just thought like, well, I have to read Tolkien because I love Lewis so much. But now that I finished it, I still think I am more of a Lewis person than a Tolkien person. So I think if you're either on one team or the other, I'm still team C.S. Lewis, but I do appreciate Tolkien a lot more now. And these books were really good. I know that Tolkien was a Catholic, and just like Lewis was Christian, so it's hard not to see those themes repeat themselves in this book, this good versus evil dynamic. Also, it's very allegorical in nature, just all the characters, how they represent just certain archetypes of the warrior, like Aragorn, and the sage and the wizard, like Gandalf, and just kind of the hero, like Frodo. I don't really need to get into it because so many people love this book. We all know why it's great. I would just say now that I've read it, Sam is definitely my favorite character. And I think when you're reading it, you think, oh, Aragorn, he's the main character. And that's certainly true. I love him. I love Gandalf. But Sam, to me, is really the heart of the story. I think Sam is the reason Tolkien wrote it. I think he was trying to send us all a message that, look, we cannot be this great hero like Aragorn. We can't be super smart, all of us, like Gandalf, and wise, but all of us have the capacity to be like Sam, to be the hero of our own story, to do what we need to do in the moments. And that's why I really love this book so much. I especially love the scene at the end, and this is not in the movie, and I went back and watched the movie, but the scene where the hobbits return to the Shire and the Shire is a mess. The Dark Lord has been defeated, all this stuff, and the elves have gone off into the west. But when the hobbits get back to their home, they realize that, oh man, it's a mess. We've got to clean this up. It's kind of the end of the hero's journey. Like, you cannot expect it to be over once you've defeated the darkness, that it's all about rebuilding. And I just love Sam's character, how he is just going around and he's determined to rebuild the Shire, and he's planting all of Galadriel's seeds. And then I just love the ending with Sam and his little baby daughter. So yes, I love this book. I'm so happy that I get this series at last. And I really think it's a good message for all of us that yes, light does defeat the darkness. All right, for my number 1 pick of 2023 is Truman by David McCullough. Yes. So I have to set this book down because it's over 1,000 pages long, and Phew, it took me all summer to read Truman. It has been on my TBR forever, and so I'm very, again, proud of myself that I finally finished Truman. John Adams, which is behind me, is one of my all-time favorite biographies, but now that I've read Truman, Truman is even better. Also, if you like David McCullough, I highly recommend The Wright Brothers. That's another excellent David McCullough biography, but Truman, wow, so good. And I think it really fit into the themes of 2023. I know that Oppenheimer was a huge movie this year. I kind of had mixed feelings about Oppenheimer, and one of the things that I did not like about it was that scene with Truman, where they're kind of acting like Truman is this jerk and that he wasn't sympathizing with Oppenheimer. And it's true, Truman did not like Oppenheimer. Truman thought Oppenheimer was a crybaby. But now that I've read the book, I understand why. He really was a fascinating person, probably one of the best presidents that we've ever had, probably one of the most humblest presidents we ever had, the most least egotistical. And just the fact that he had to follow one of the most popular presidents we ever had, FDR. This book just tells Truman's entire life from when he grows up on a farm. He was not from a very pedigreed background. He was not from an elitist family. He didn't go to a fancy school, Harvard or Yale. He was just from the Midwest, from Kansas City, Missouri. He was a farmer up until his early 30s. And then during World War I, he was obviously shipped off to Europe. And that's really where he just grew and developed, became an officer. And then once he got back to America, his life really took off, not only with his family life, with his wife Bess and his daughter Margaret, but he became a business owner, a judge in Kansas City. And then eventually in his 60s, he became a senator. So that's why I really like this book, is because Truman was a late bloomer, like Abraham Lincoln, like Churchill. He wasn't a success right from the beginning of his life. And his trajectory as a senator and eventually a vice president, this whole election of how he became vice president during Roosevelt's third term, very interesting. It was very controversial. Roosevelt did not want him as his running mate. And then just this whole history of the atomic bomb, obviously. That was one of the main reasons I read the book, because I wanted to find out, look, what was going through Truman's mind. He was the person that made one of the most important decisions in history. And obviously, Oppenheimer, the movie, does pick up on those themes. One thing you'll realize when you actually read the book about Truman is that the decision to drop the atomic bomb was made long before Truman came in office. It was a decision that was not any one man's decision, whether Oppenheimer or Truman. It was a universal, collective decision made by thousands and thousands of people that were involved in the atomic bomb. They kind of kept it a secret from him. When he was a senator, he was on a lot of these government oversight committees, and so he was realizing, look, where is all this money going to? He was questioning the Roosevelt administration, and people like Stinson were like, oh no, it's just for the war. Truman wasn't stupid. He knew that something was going on. Even when he was elected as vice president, Stinson and Roosevelt did not tell him the truth. It was only after Roosevelt died and he became president that he kind of found out the truth about the atomic bombs. Time period of when he found out about it and when it was actually dropped was only a matter of a couple months, and him going to that famous Potsdam conference with Churchill, with Stalin. I also just love the history of after World War II and just all the things that Truman was involved with. If you really, again, want to know his stance on nuclear energy, you should just see the decisions that he did make as president. One of the things he did was he was really adamant that the Atomic Energy Commission be in the hands of civilians, not the military. He was also a part of the formation of United Nations, which was Roosevelt's dream. And then one of the most controversial decisions that he made was to fire General MacArthur, who was a very, very charismatic military leader. He fired him during the Korean War so that MacArthur could not drop the atomic bomb again. If you're watching the Oppenheimer movie and you think that Truman is this villain or something, he wasn't. He was probably one of the most honorable presidents that we ever had. The reason I love this book so much is it was just a great history of the 20th century. And you realize in today's world that we are living in kind of the repercussions of the decisions that were made at that time. So definitely North Korea, South Korea, also this formation of Israel, Obviously, that's been in the news lately. And I think in order to understand what's happening today, you need to go back and learn history, like they say. You've got to learn history so you don't repeat it. And I really do think that the biography of Truman by David McCullough is just one of those great books to read to get an understanding of history. In fact, one of Truman's favorite philosophers was, you guessed it, Marcus Aurelius. And so again, I do think that biographies like Truman and books like Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, are great books to read in the year 2024. Thank you so much for joining me for my recap of my favorite classic books of 2023. I just loved all of these books. Everything from Edith Wharton to Truman to Oliver Twist, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. One of the reasons, again, why I am such a big believer in reading the classics is because not only are these books important in the time period in which they were written, but they're still important and they're still relevant today. Like a book like Truman, a book like Oliver Twist, still you can see these themes repeating themselves in today's world. So I think they're really good picks for the new year and for 2024. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy New Year and have a great day.